I expect everyone's heard the saying, curiosity killed the cat. And I don't doubt that there have been times when a cat's exploratory tendencies worked out badly. But if cats are truly curious, and I'm a cat guy, and I've got a couple cats, and I love cats, and I will affirm that cats are very exploratory. It's fun to bring something into the house, and cats will be all over to inspect it. But if that tendency is there, the evolutionary perspective tells us it didn't mostly kill cats. It must have helped them survive because our tendencies, or any creature's tendencies that are inborn, are there because they served a purpose. Or to put it more specifically for evolutionary perspective terms, they're there because those of our ancestors who had those tendencies were more likely to get their DNA into the future than those who did not have those tendencies. So if cats are curious and are interested in exploring things in their environment, we can infer that for the most part, that tendency was advantageous in the evolutionary struggle to get your DNA into the future. That's what's selected for. Now, I'm really not talking about cats as much as I really want to talk about us humans. We have a tendency in the secular world, the people who think about our reality in terms that are not the ones handed down by our religious traditions, to think that our experience is merely subjective and that the things that we derive about what's real and what's true from our experience become matters of opinion. The merely subjective means that the differences between different points of view, there's nothing to judge between them. And that has led to the secular worldview, at least a large part of it, treating questions of value and treating the idea of spiritual truth as, at best, a second-class reality. But that makes a profound mistake, and even a dangerous mistake, because if we don't think that there's anything that's really true about value, and if we don't think that there is anything we need to attend to in what one might call the realm of spiritual experience, we're going to be missing out on an absolutely vital connection with an inborn part of ourselves. We have an experiential tendency to regard things in terms of where they are on a spectrum between better and worse. And better and worse has got to do with the quality of our experience of it. It's got to do with whether it's something that we are glad to have or want to avoid. Now, there are differences between individuals on such things. There are differences between cultures on how people experience the better and the worse. But underneath all of that, there is a fundamental reality of experiential tendency that's embedded in the human nature. And that's there because those tendencies helped our ancestors to survive and who to do better than those of their compatriots of that generations ago time who lacked those tendencies. If if you are positively drawn to some things, like, say, making love, that means there will be a motive to do the things that are required to get your DNA into the future. And if on the worst side of the better and worse spectrum, there are things like dropping a rock on your foot, we will be motivated because of the negative dimension of the experience to avoid it. And that also increases our chances of getting our DNA into the future. So we are possessed of, I would say, a very rich set of inborn ways of evaluating things, even though they're unfinished. I think about like some of the figures of Michelangelo. I mean, some of his statues are really, really precise and defined, but he has a whole bunch of works that, and I'm not sure that I understand quite why, whether they were unfinished. Well, I saw something in the movie The Agony and the Ecstasy that suggested that he was trying to express something about the unfinishedness. And we are born unfinished like that, but we are not. You can see the being that he was moving toward, Michelangelo. And likewise, our humanity has some dimensions that have to do with feeling loved and for feeling and having our bodily needs tended to, and finding meaningfulness and purpose in our lives, things like that that I think that are pretty much part of what we are designed to be, inborn nature. Uh, it's not quite as defined as how each one of us has a human face with a nose and two eyes and a mouth and two ears, and 8 billion of us, and almost everybody fits the general schema, even though there are important differences that allow us to recognize one individual from another. Likewise, I think that there is a human system of value of a somewhat blurry, but nonetheless powerfully defined sort. Just like there's a human nose. It's different from a bear's nose or a horse's nose. It's a human nose, and it's got certain qualities, and it also has things in common with the bear and the horse, and so do our experiential tendencies about what we consider of positive value and what we consider of negative value. Those are also in some kind of a human shape in all of us, or almost all of us. So that is, it's not merely subjective. The thing that we're born having inside of us is like a projection. There's some mathematical way of talking about this, but I can't remember what it was. It is a reflection in terms of experiential tendencies and motivational forces and such, of the requirements of surviving in the world. It is one of the strategies that life has chosen in order to succeed. I don't know whether experiential tendencies apply to the trees I see in the forest around me. I think there are maybe some ways in which we can see that plants have experience too. And I don't know if you can talk about motivation, or if these experiences get the plant to do what it needs to do to survive, let's say something nibbling on its leaves. I don't know, but we have experiential tendencies that are a reflection of the world that we have evolved in. It's a mistake to regard that world as real, but then dismiss as merely subjective this experiential tendency that has been crafted into our nature by the evolutionary process. I also claim, and I invite people to see where I've developed a lot of this in some detail and with as much clarity, compelling logic, evidence, etc., as I could muster on my website, abetterhumanstory.org, where I think I will deliver some goods to those who would want to have them. But that tendency is what we need to honor as a basic reality. And from it, we can derive by steps the idea that the moral dimension is real, important, and life-serving. Not that there's necessarily clarity about everything, but there are vectors, there are truths that are essential to the life process. And we should honor the moral dimension that we can derive from the fact that we evolved to be creatures who experience some things as better and some things as worse. In fact, and this is a whole nother dimension that warrants its own development. The reality is that value could only exist in the experiential dimension. In a lifeless universe, nothing could matter because there's nothing for anything to matter to. It makes no sense to talk about better and worse when it's not better or worse for anybody. You can do what they do in Genesis, and you can posit that at the very beginning there was a being who made light and said it is good. Well, okay, if God is being pleased, great. But if you don't have that concept of how things emerge, then you begin with you have to begin with unless you've got something that has an experiential dimension that already exists at the beginning. You have to assume that there was no such thing as value in the universe for a long time, because it takes a long time for the evolutionary process to create creatures for whom there is a better and a worse. You can get from here, from this place where we have evolved. We are the fruits of a strategy that life found, that it created value, a positive experience, a negative experience, which actually does bring value into the world, because a creature that's finding fulfillment is simply better than a creature that is miserable and suffering and being tortured on the rack. It is not relativistic. It is the only way value could be. So the moral dimension is basically built upon the idea that what is good is a human world, or a general world in which life thrives, and those things for whom things matter, who experience the better and the worse, are feeling good about their lives. That, evolution does not create that as a whole systemic reality, because there are so many competing interests. And feeling good is something that the prey can't reliably have if there's also going to be the interest of life in the form of the predator who doesn't want to starve to death and gets a positive experience about killing the prey and getting something to eat. So it's not there systematically, but nonetheless, the definition of the better and the worse that we need to be keeping in our minds as we develop our civilization is we need to create an order that is optimal for leading to the experiential dimension being in the positive realm for us humans and for other things that for whom there is a better and a worse. And that's the way to conceive what the best world would be. And we humans, stepping onto the path of civilization, have departed from the world that evolution put into a good order, an order in which creatures are all trying to have positive experience, the pursuit of happiness. But it's also an order which is so wholly opportunistic that there is nature red in tooth and claw, as well as the good of creatures thriving, which they're continually striving to do. But we left that order, and it's our job to create that order. And when we create that order, we should have a concept of value that isn't reliably there in today's secular world view. And I know this because, I've been interacting for, I guess, since the mid-1980s. With the liberal secular world and a variety of the issues of our times, not least how to perceive and how to relate to the ugly force that's been rising on the right. There was a failure there to see that there are dimensions of reality that the secular worldview hasn't really grasped, which is there is value, and sometimes a force might arise that is best understood in terms of evil, a failure to see something, because if you don't have a firm grasp on the reality of something that is the good, however vague it may be, you aren't going to have the mental maps in which to recognize the opposite of the good when it arises in the world by taking possession of and gaining power over a large component of the civilizational system. In this case, conservative America, corporate America, the Republican Party, and certain other dimensions of American civilization, coming together to form a coherent force that consistently works to make things worse. I claim that I can prove that, but the idea of makes things worse has to be given full respect, because if you don't think that there really is anything other than opinion on such issues, you're not going to think that you're dealing with reality. But we can see in what the Republican Party has become now that there was a reality of something that was taking over the Republican Party. But in order to see the reality, you have to have the concept that there is a reality to the idea of better and worse. And the secular worldview hasn't had that very well. The religious worldview is pretty good at it. The idea of good and evil was very fundamental. You got God and Satan right there in the very, first books. God no sooner makes a demand on humankind that Satan enters the picture to lead Eve astray as the founder of us as a sinful species. By the way, my Better Human Story really refutes all that business about the sinful species. It really says that if any creature steps onto the path of civilization, it will inevitably unleash a destructive force, because the unprecedented step created an unprecedented situation which had an unprecedented, inevitable systemic dynamic. And that dynamic is such that we humans would develop a human world in which a lot of very destructive stuff goes on as a result of the disorder. A human world that, one of the ways I describe it is inevitable that as the system evolves, given that systemic dynamic, the shape of civilized societies would be determined to a disproportionate degree by the spirit of the gangster. The spirit of the gangster is what inevitably prevails in a situation of anarchy. And anarchy is the inevitable circumstance, systemic circumstance, that any creature that starts to invent its own way of life will inevitably find itself on a path to what prevails in anarchy, which is warlords who are basically gangsters. And we see them in history to a disproportionate degree in the cruelties of the empires that arose in the first 5,000 years of civilization. There's a better and there's a worse. And there arose a force that was consistently making things worse. But you can't see it unless you take the idea of worse seriously. And evolution is always choosing what survives over what dies. So basically, we have to consider the good to be good versus evil is very much a translation of life versus death. The evolutionary order out of which we emerged has life and death. It's not really exactly our friend. I mean, it creates value in us, but it's not being directed by purpose. And so it creates a world that is optimizes in some important way, but optimizes in a situation where a lot of things happen randomly, and life is sort of just finding its way forward the way a trickle of water on the earth finds its way. But even though it is completely opportunistic, it does create an order. It creates an order which does the best that can be done in terms of creating something that can remain viable into the future. It eliminates things that are contrary to the perpetuation of the living systems. I put it this way: the lion and the zebra and the grass work together to create a perpetual motion machine even as they devour each other. And Gregory Bateson had a great line: no creature can win against its environment for long. So there is a kind of synergy that gets built into the system, even with all the competing interests and all the things that are not just the visions of Isaiah about, basically everything being perfect. The creatures are devouring each other. But within that, an order that serves life gets created by the process, which is consistently choosing what can survive over what cannot. But we broke out of that order over the last 10 or 12,000 years. And that has proved to be a very dangerous thing. It proves us to have unleashed a very powerful destructive force that continues to operate in the world around us, and it emerged with civilization because of that spirit of the gangster, and it moves. I claim to be able to show the way in which you can see it moving a force that consistently transmit a pattern of brokenness. The way broken things create broken things, and it moves through human history. And you can see this thing the way you can see the wind in the swaying of the trees and the flapping of the clothes on the line. There is a force that is visible that inevitably emerges, and it is a force that meets how I define evil, which is a coherent force that consistently works to make things worse. So we need to embrace the idea of there being a good, and to recognize that there actually is a force operating that has characteristics of making the world worse in a systematic way that is reasonable to call evil, given the way the force of evil has traditionally been understood. It doesn't have to be called that, but it makes sense to call it that because there really is a force within us that was put there because it's life-serving. And there really is a systemic force that inevitably arose with civilization that's not a function of human nature. And I say that any creature on any planet, anywhere in the cosmos that steps onto the path of civilization will undergo a social evolutionary process as tormented as human history shows ours to have been, regardless of its nature. Regardless of the creature's nature, the inevitable selection for power will inevitably craft the human world into a form that is excessively dictated by the kinds of spirit that characterizes what prevails in a war of all against all. In other words, the spirit of the gangster. And speaking of spirit, another way in which the experiential tendencies that we can see are part of our nature has to do with the reality of the spiritual realm. And by saying that, I'm not making any kind of metaphysical assertion about the nature of reality in some objective way. I'm talking about a fact. an observable fact is that a fair portion of human beings, it seems like in every culture and pretty much, in every, pretty widespread, at least a third of human beings have it within their repertoire of life to have experiences that they regard as having special and powerful meanings about the truth. People have spiritually transformative experiences. However we're to understand it, it is simply a fact that people have experiences which they think are giving them access to something which shows them more fundamentally where it's at, and gives them a sense of that something is sacred, and that perhaps conveys with it some kind of guidance and direction, a sense of calling. Sometimes these are experiences that you can see operating in the human world in a lot of lives that are life-changing. I myself had an experience when I was 24, and pretty much everything, including my doing this video, follows from that experience. And that's, and if you talk to 20 people, you'll find, I'm guessing, a half dozen at least, who will be able to articulate some kind of experience that felt like a deeper reality, which had a powerful impact on them, and which told them some things were true, which remain in their hearts as important truths. And if I don't know how widespread that capacity is, I think that what we experience about better and worse, that goes, certainly my cats have got that too. But when it comes to the idea of spiritually transformative experiences, I'm kind of guessing that there's not much of it in other species, but, I really don't know. Has an elephant ever had a spiritually transformative experience? They are beings, but I don't know. But we humans do have that in the human genome. It is so widespread. It is a capacity it may not be in every human, but it is distributed to pervade the human genome. And from that, we can again infer, just like with curiosity and the cat, we can infer that those of our, at some point, going back to, ancestrally to the fish or wherever you have to do before you get to, there is no spiritual capacity, no tendency to have experiences like the ones we're talking about people having. So at some point, it starts to be instilled into the genome as a capacity. Not only are these creatures able to experience some things as better and some things as worse, but at least some of them are having these experiences that have this power and these qualities and such. And if that was getting instilled over, however many generations, if it was gradually emerging to get to where we are with the human species as it is now, where we know that capacity is there, we have to infer that those of our ancestors who had that capacity were more successful in getting their DNA into the future. In other words, it was life-serving. And if it was life-serving for them to have those experiences, we can infer that the impact of those experiences was such that it enhanced the creature's likelihood of surviving. So in other words, that dimension of experience that is factual, we can infer has been the source of some kind of motivation, some kind of understanding, some kind of commitment, whatever, that led people to take a different course in how they lived their lives, that was advantageous compared to the kinds of choices being made by people, by their parallels, communities that didn't have that capacity to have spiritual experience. So at least for the circumstances of our hunting-gathering ancestors, because civilization's been too recent to imagine that capacity getting instilled in a mere 5,000 or 10,000 years. At least I don't imagine. It must have been valuable to hunters and gatherers, and if it was advantageous for them to have the impact of the spiritual experience, that pretty well proves that the spiritual dimension is a source of important truth. It is important, and it is real. It is real at that factual level, and the evidence tells us that somehow we will get messages about the sacred, or whatever language you want to use about it, that we really should listen to. I mean, it is true that what we civilized human beings need to do, so many millennia into this process, is not identical with what our hunting-gathering ancestors had to do, because we have created a different world that gives us different challenges. And so we need to become what this non-biologically determined human world we got here. We got to become something which is not entirely biologically determined about what we are supposed to be as human beings. We have to take some different tasks on because of the disorder that we've created. I mean, we either got to get our act together, which is an achievement that no hunter-gatherer had to do, or we're going to destroy ourselves. So we've got this unnatural relationship to the planet. We're so dominant in a way that, in the absence of the purely biological evolutionary process would never have created something like human civilization. But here we are, and we're so far along on it that we just become shaped in our consciousness the way perhaps it would have been most fulfilling for a hunting-gatherer to do, or at least we have to twist ourselves into such a shape where we've got the capability of designing a sustainable civilization. We've got to problem solve at the level of international anarchy and the whole war system. To remake the world, at a profound level that no hunting-gatherer ever had to do. All they got to do is stay within the niche in which they evolved biologically, which is basically just an extension of what their primate ancestors had done. But our species has now created a world in which we've got some very complicated tasks because we've created a complicated mess. But I still think that we really rest on a solid moral and spiritual foundation. That the basic aspect of the moral and spiritual understandings, the basic aspect is unchanged. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. That's just a universal recipe for a good human world. The human heart works to create good feeling relationships with other people. That we survived by forming cooperative bonds. That was an essential part of the strategy of becoming human. And I think that fundamental level, love not hate, justice not injustice, peace not war, that these were, I think, inevitably crafted into our nature as values. Values that got fueled often by spiritually transformative experiences. So I think that we can rely on the moral and spiritual core, the human system of values, and the capability of having spiritually transformative experiences that are built into our nature because they used to be enhance people's chances of survival, or they wouldn't be there. Well, I think they still can. And part of the way, what would enable them is that we honor them, that we recognize that these dimensions are messages from our evolutionary past that always chooses life over death and is showing us in our experience of value and in our the occasional contact with some super real level that we might call spiritual. That all that is a place we can look to for guidance as we face what is really still the fundamental challenge of life versus death. Because, so I say, it's really just a toss-up. That's what it looks like to me, and sometimes that seems optimistic. In the next not so many generations, it will human civilization will either get its act together in some fairly fundamental ways so that it can survive for the long haul, or we would have destroyed ourselves. We're not going to just be able to keep muddling through, and that can be shown, that the increasing power of civilization and the increasingly visible ways in which we could destroy ourselves just say that we got to get our act together in time, because there are forces that have been in civilization all this time, and we haven't brought them under control. And it's a toss-up whether the human the story is going to end with somehow our sort of pulling ourselves away from the abyss, like in the Westerns, when the hero jumps on the runaway stagecoach and manages to get it to turn away from the edge of the cliff that it was about to drive over with the lovely damsel inside. Or will we be able to bring that off? Because we've got a long way to go. We've got a long way to go to make sure that something like the nuclear holocaust that might have happened in 1962 with worse luck, that we've ordered the human world on a global basis in such a way that no such thing as a nuclear holocaust, no such thing as a war between massive nuclear powers is any longer possible or conceivable, or at least as minimal as we don't keep playing Russian roulette through international crises until one of them goes badly awry and the whole human project ends in catastrophe. We need to put together a human relationship with the rest of the living planet, which is largely means an economy in which the human world's relationship to the rest of the living systems is sustainable, that there is a harmony, like the kinds of harmony that the lion and the zebra and the grass had. There's some kind of harmony where you've got a perpetual motion machine, even as different things in the system are living and dying, and nonetheless there's a harmony in it, so that this is a perpetual motion machine, and the prosperity of the human world is not at the expense of the integrity of the whole biosphere. We have a long way to go on that. Though I'm speaking today on a day when apparently something rather important happened in that direction. I don't know how important it really is, but people are making a big deal out of it. That the convention, COP 23? I don't know. The convention on climate change that just concluded somehow, sort of surprisingly, at the very end, ran overtime and came up with some kind of consensus view that had to do with at least a more complete statement than hitherto from the world about phasing out fossil fuels, though I think they wouldn't go so far as to use the phrase phasing out. But, John Kerry was hugging another delegate because I guess this was a big step forward. But we got a long way to go in terms of having a human world that's so ordered that something like what's happened with climate change could never happen again. I mean, to have an industry that is able to flex the power to deceive the world, manipulate enough sacrifices, plunges us into a greater catastrophe for its own short-term profits. I mean, we really need to be able to build a world where something like that simply couldn't happen. And part of our fortifying ourselves to achieve that is to infuse the force that's driving in those good directions with the moral and spiritual passions that we should be striving to be in connection with. Because both the moral dimension and the spiritual dimension are demonstrably, as you can see in the evolutionary perspective, they are demonstrably real, important, and life-serving, and have been, they're there because they are good sources of guidance, and so we got to take them fully seriously and change our secular worldview so that when we contact that, we are passionate for the fight, and when we see something that we might as well call evil rising as a coherent force in our world, we form a powerful, coherent force to oppose it, including in the election of 2024, where this battle takes on the form of democracy versus fascism, that we bring moral and spiritual passion to the need to defeat the force of fascism that's going to be on the ballot. honor the reality of this life, these life-serving dimensions. And that requires changing the understanding of the secular worldview in some important ways. It uses the evolutionary perspective to break out of the moral relativism and the lack of spiritual seriousness that has infused more of the secular worldview than has been good for us. So that's what I'm trying to provide in intellectual terms, to flesh out that those dangerous holes in the secular worldview that make us weaker in fighting the fight that we need to fight on the side of life and good against death and evil that we're all called to be fighting. And all, especially at a moment where things seem to be in some kind of a showdown. Thanks.